Welcome to Testing in the Pub.
Okay, so welcome back to another Testing in the Pub. This is in fact Testing in the Pub in the airport. So
Testing in the airport.
Testing in the airport. So I'm here with Declan O'Riordan, and we're sitting here with pints of Guinness.
Testing in the airport pub.
Testing in the airport pub. We are in Dublin Airport. We've just been at the Soft Test conference, both speaking. What did you think of the conference, Declan?
It was well organised actually. It was a very nice venue, good hotel, looked after us nicely, and it was a good turnout. A lot of people came down from Belfast to Dublin, so I'd recommend it.
Yeah, no, it was certainly good fun.
Well, your talk was well received, wasn't it? They liked that one.
Yeah, I think so. As I believe was yours. So.
Yeah, I mean, mine I think was maybe a little hard to follow towards the end because it's new material, and I'm not sure I can actually explain it clearly enough yet to audiences that are unfamiliar with security in general.
Yeah,
but
hopefully our audience has listened to the previous podcasts with Dan and have a bit of an idea of security testing. If you haven't, then I'd certainly recommend have a listen to Dan's couple of podcasts to get that general thing. But we've called this one the 3 epiphanies of security testing, haven't we?
Yes, we have. Yeah.
Certainly, I gather that you've had these 3 epiphanies. But before we kind of talk about the epiphanies themselves, what kind of got you interested in security testing? What got you into security testing in the first place?
Well, it was that moment almost 6 years ago now when I was sitting at my desk waiting for a code release, and I was filling in the time. I was looking at the test plan templates that we used to use in those days, and there was that section, security testing, which was almost always put out of scope, or we'd transfer the responsibility to the project manager to find budget for a penetration test at the end of the project, just before it went into production, possibly when it was in production, as an afterthought that even followed performance testing. It was considered.
Wow, even after performance
exactly.
testing.
That's how bad things were. And it was curiosity, that I didn't consider myself a proper professional test manager if I didn't understand this section that kept going out of scope or being left to the last moment, or often just not done at all because there was no budget for it, and I wanted to take ownership of that.
Excellent. So how long have you been doing the security testing stuff?
I think it's since 2010, but I was juggling it with all my regular work until 2014, when I started getting seriously concentrating on that since spring of 2014. I've done nothing else.
Yeah, and then you kind of popped up at SIGIST, wasn't it? And then it all kind of exploded with Eurostar and stuff.
That was the nerve-wracking experience that when they announced at the end of the Eurostar at Gothenburg that the next Eurostar for 2014 would be in Dublin, it clicked that, right, well, my dad was from Dublin, I want to pay a tribute to him because I was really busy when he was dying. I had to work, and a baby was 1 week old, and all the rest of it. So I felt like, here's time to catch up on that. And also I had a bee in my bonnet about security. I just thought this was incredible. The people I was talking to at work, none of them knew anything about application security. They had the same impression I used to have, that firewalls and antivirus took care of all that trouble, and it was not our concern to build security into the applications. And as soon as I started looking at it, I realised, well, that's totally wrong. Actually, that's my first epiphany. I've given it away. Can I say that?
There you go. There's an epiphany for free, everybody.
So that was the realisation that the application security was different to the network architecture security, but our security team were only dealing with network architecture. So we had antivirus, we had firewalls that they were configuring, they were also managing an intrusion prevention system and an intrusion detection system. And the intrusion prevention system was looking at messages that were arriving to us in the clear, the HTTP messages, and then comparing them to its catalogue of known signatures of malicious scripts and saying whether it would allow them in or not. It couldn't do that for HTTPS messages, which is when the HTTP is layered on top of SSL or TLS and becomes encrypted. So there was 25% of the traffic it couldn't actually test if it was malicious or not. And then the intrusion detection system was looking for unusual activity in the network, such as an exfiltration of sensitive data. but that needed loads of maintenance and monitoring. If a human doesn't look at it to see that it's alerting to something and then act upon it, then it doesn't do any use, any good. That was when I realised, well, actually, it's obvious we've got to be doing something about application security, because the security team aren't. They didn't come to the projects and say you shouldn't code like that or you should test like this. They were just leaving us to our own devices. So ever since then I've had a bee in my bonnet, but it's become actually more extreme as each year's gone on. So I think about it almost all the time.
Yeah. Until you finally click. You finally clicked. Maybe so. I've got a bit of like the impression of like Michael Douglas in Falling Down. You suddenly went a bit kind of Nitro.
Yeah. What? You mean I'm the bad guy?
Awesome. So yeah. Tell us about Eurostar. Tell us what happened to Eurostar.
Yeah. Well, at the Gothenburg closing ceremony, I managed to nab Paul Gerard as he was talking to Michael Bolton, and I said, please tell me, how can I get to speak at Eurostar next year? And his primary advice was, well, you have to speak somewhere else first. They can't, at the biggest testing conference in Europe, they can't take a total unknown without any kind of track record, because it's too big a risk when people are paying a lot of money to go to a conference like that. So he said, talk somewhere else, like the Test Management Forum in London or the BCS SIGIST.
I wonder why he said the Test Management Forum.
Yes, well, I was soon to find out that, of course, he ran the Test Management Forum. But I mean, I'm a big fan of the Test Management Forum, and I actually went there on a reconnaissance mission in February to see what sort of people went to tester gathering type meetings and what the quality of the talks were like, and whether I'd have a chance of submitting a talk and actually getting up on stage and doing it, having no experience whatsoever of talking outside of the office environment. It was funny because I was sitting in these talks, and there was Mike Jared, who was with IDBS, I think at the time, with his team, doing a presentation on it was kind of like, I think it was predicting the number of defects that were going to be in a project. And I know they said something, and then they said something else. I said, well, I sort of put my hand up. Wait a minute, you've just contradicted yourselves, and that. How do you reconcile this with that? And then somebody behind me joined in and started like sort of attacking, and like I got carried away because it was, I guess it's like in my instincts after now 27 years testing, it's just to be critical, and I guess in my personality it's not easy to sort of keep the lid on it sometimes. So, and it ended up, afterwards we sort of patched it up, but people were saying, well, that was like a rough ride Mike Jared got and things like that, little was I to know that a few weeks later he'd be reviewing my submission to Eurostar. And it's like, wait, who's this bloke? And I guess I got through the first round, but when they came to like deciding the timetable, it's like, hey, it's not anonymous anymore. This is the one who's caused all the trouble at the Test Management Forum. But I mean, amazingly, it was very good grace. He actually introduced my talk in Dublin in November, and by that time we were good mates, and we've been out for drinks and meals with our wives together and things like that. So all's well that ends well. But it certainly was a wake-up call to watch my mouth a bit more. But the first time I actually spoke at a conference, of course, was not the TMF. I managed to get a quick one in at the BCS SIGIST.
Indeed, yeah. I think that's where I met you, wasn't it?
It is, yeah. Time? Yeah, you were due to speak just before me, and I was a bundle of nerves. It was a 22-minute slot, if I recall rightly, to cover, and I think I had 20 slides, and I think you had like 26 or something like that. And I'd done my rehearsals several times over, and I was thinking, how is he going to get through 26 slides in 22 minutes? It's going to overrun, and then I'll have less time, and oh no. And then, of course, you actually did do it. But then when I think we changed over laptops and I plugged mine in, it was, oh no, the connection's not working, and like the pressure.
Typical presenter's pressure.
Yeah, and you were a hell of an act to follow. You're talking
That's very
mobile.
Nice of you to say so.
Yeah, well, it was like an extremely good talk, and that really added to the pressure of novice speaker. 22 minutes in front of what was like a very impressive audience. There was Dorothy Graham sitting in the front row, and the Barbican's slightly intimidating. It's a very good venue, but
it is, isn't it?
Business.
The way it kind of slopes up in that kind of more traditional lecture theatre style, whereas you talk at a lot of conferences and it's just a conference room, so it's almost like talking at a wedding reception or something. But no, you're right. The Barbican is that. It adds that certain sort of gravitas to the proceedings, doesn't it?
Absolutely, yeah. A big monumental opera house type
Indeed.
conference venue.
Yeah, indeed. Okay, so got involved there. Got to Eurostar. Talked to Eurostar.
Yeah.
Won some stuff at Eurostar.
On some stuff. Yeah. This is the craziest thing. That if anyone listening to the podcast is considering speaking, this is how mad it is. When I came back from Gothenburg, it was November 2013, but I thought about it for a few days, and then I said to a woman at work, I'm going to submit the talk to Eurostar. I want to be accepted. I want to be voted the session that delegates want to hear again, the do-over session, the one in case that other people have missed it, and I want to win the paper for the prize for best conference paper, even though I'd never written a conference paper in my life at that point. And I'm going to change jobs, and actually all of those things came to pass. So it was an incredible year for me in 2014. So everything happened that I wanted.
Yeah, I mean that's great, isn't it? Because that do-over session, there's always the one I've been to that do-over session twice. Yours last year, and then the one the year before as well. It's Alexandra Kasapu, and yeah, the atmosphere in those do-over sessions is always really, really good. There's always that kind of electricity.
Yes, absolutely. That's
audience.
what I sensed that as well. The atmosphere for Alexandra's, it was like people were saying you've got to hear this talk, and then I went in there and the room was packed, and it was an electric atmosphere, and I thought this is the ultimate thing that can ever happen to a tester who wants to speak, is to have this experience. So I set myself the goal of that, never having spoken anywhere. It was crazy, but sometimes these things happen.
That's the thing. It's an extremely good message for anyone who's thinking of speaking,
Absolutely,
and hasn't spoken so far.
Yeah.
Get
I mean,
up.
I did get help. I mean, there was Paul Gerard's advice, speak at other smaller conferences. James Lindsay was boarding the same plane as me, so I quickly caught him in the lobby just before we went into the plane, and he said, give me some advice on how to submit a professionally worded submission to Eurostar. Then actually, while I'd been at Gothenburg, I caught Dirk-Jan de Groot, the Netherlands guy, the was Tester of the Year last year. This is current Tester of the Year, that won the prize. And I asked him, how can I present a talk? And I showed him a little video I'd made, a mashup sort of thing, and he gave me tips on things like, well, give the audience something to take away. Have the 3 takeaways, and that was very good advice, to try and think of what can I pass on to the audience that they will feel is of value.
Yeah, exactly.
So those are the main tips.
Like, as an example, 3 epiphanies of security testing.
3, having 3 is
three.
apparently
3 is the magic number.
It is.
As
It's
we
a
all
magic
know.
number.
3 is indeed the magic number.
Yeah.
You've kind of touched upon the first epiphany, but
Yes.
kind of expand a little on this first epiphany, and then let's talk about the second and the third epiphanies.
Yeah.
The three takeaways from this podcast for everyone.
All right, okay. So the first epiphany was the realization that application security is different to network security and building security and all traditional security. It's at the application layer of the technology stack rather than the transport layer of the technology stack. And most of the things that I considered to be security were actually operating at the transport layer, working in the network, and the security teams tend to be part of the architecture and networking teams rather than the project teams. So the second epiphany, which again now seems obvious, was that there was an enormous gap between the project teams who are building all these applications and the security teams who are experts in security but not engaged in giving advice or helping projects deliver secure applications. And it seemed to me that if they don't come to us, then we have to sort of go to security and learn more about security, and that's what I've been doing, is in a different way to Dan. I think Dan Billing has been he's really concentrating on the penetration testing. I've been sort of slowly going in that direction some of the time, but also I've been trying to look at the whole panorama and try and see what is working and what isn't working, and is there some strategically better way we can handle the problem. And that has led to the third epiphany.
So just kind of touching on that, I mean, if I if I wished to understand more about security, as you mentioned there in the second epiphany, where would you recommend I go? I know a little about security. I'll be honest, most of what I know about security has been learned from watching either yourself, Dan, or Bill Matthews talk about security.
Right.
And that's been great. Where would you recommend I go if I want to know more, or if any of our listeners want to know more about security?
Yeah, I mean, if you wanted to be a certified information system security professional, then you should buy Sean Harris's master text on it, which is 1,430 pages, and then you would end up having to take an exam that lasts many hours and submit effectively an essay proving that you've worked in security for 5 years and you've handled recovery after a breach and done policies and things like that. It's not the sort of security that I wanted to do. I wanted to actually make applications we were building in projects more secure. So for that, the place that I found was best was the Open Web Application Security Project to get me started.
Yep.
It's a tremendous free resource. You can become a member, and it's a very modest fee, which I can't remember what it is at the moment, but I actually made a mistake and joined the American site and the European site, so I ended up subscribing twice, but it was such good value, it's certainly worth it, because I drew a lot from that resource. So you can pretty much find anything that you want in there regarding application security, but I guess the weakness is you might end up thinking the top 10 of whether it's application security, web vulnerabilities, or whether it's the Internet of Things, or cloud computing, or mobile. You might think that 10 are all there is to security and vulnerabilities, whereas, of course, it's much bigger, and they just tried to come up with a nice roundish number like 10 to make it fit on a page and give us something to work with. And actually, the top 10 web application vulnerabilities are a very good top 10, because when you dig into them, you then learn a lot more. So things like broken authentication and access controls, things like that then takes you to a lot of other places when you start learning about that. But of course, it's always important to remember that a generic top 10 worldwide, in the opinion of the OWASP committee, isn't necessarily the top 10 at your business. And if you don't have a database, for example, then the number one vulnerability injection is not really a concern as far as SQL database injection goes. So there are other types of injection.
Like so many areas of development or testing, whatever, it's contextual.
Absolutely.
You've got to look at that. It's a great prioritized list, but you need to contextualize that in your context rather than that more general context.
Yes, that's right. And I started to recognise as I read books on security, a lot of them by the publisher Wiley, W-I-L-E-Y, that a lot of the OWASP material draws from these books, and so they're complementary, but the books go into more detail, explain better sometimes than the OWASP material does, because I guess for copyright theft they can't just lift pages out of other people's books, but there's definitely a close parallel between a lot of that material. I've just lost my way there, drinking beer and thinking about flights.
To be fair, I was thinking, there you go, you can tell we're in an airport. Do you hear that? That was somebody's missed their flight by the sound of it.
Yeah. No, I remember what it was now. Yeah, thinking about the OWASP top 10, that actually, the more I looked into it, the more I saw there was a very large number of things to consider, not just penetration testing, which for some people that is security testing in its whole. I ended up with 17 kind of compartments in a mental model of what security was, and that began with, at the highest level, review the systems development lifecycle, or the security development lifecycle if you prefer. Because if you're trying to develop projects in an agile way, but you're still applying security in a waterfall or V-model way, it's always going to be banging heads, and it doesn't really work. And that, the evidence is all around us that security is not working. So I guess that is a major part of the problem.
Yeah.
And then there's the drivers for security. So you could say, well, there are legal requirements that you have something to protect data, and then there are optional standards that you may choose to adopt, like ISO 27001, which just all these standards just set a floor. So the payment card industry, data security standards, etc.
PCI,
Yeah, I mean, a lot of enterprises comply with that because they're handling debit and credit cards and so on. They have to comply with it, but it just sets a flaw, and they still suffer many breaches. So there was a realization that simply ticking a compliance box actually doesn't make you secure, although a lot of people would like to think it does. That a truly secure system would have to go well above these compliance standards. But then there probably is no such thing as an unhackable system. But there are systems that it would require so much energy to hack that they would probably cost them more in doing the hack than they would ever gain from it. And that's reversing the asymmetric economics of cybersecurity in our favour. Because at the moment they can buy a malicious script from the dark web for $10 or $20 and like successfully hack a multi-million-dollar enterprise. So everything works in their favour. If we turn the tables, then we start winning.
Yeah, scary stuff though, isn't it? So, epiphany number 3. This is have a drink
I'll
first.
just sip this one.
Have a nice sip of Guinness before thinking about epiphany number 3.
And let the donger go.
Passenger Kate Mercer, please pick up the courtesy
Passenger
cell
Stephen
phone.
Janaway, your gate is closing.
Yeah. So I think my flight's in an hour. I hope.
Better keep track of it.
You see, this is the dedication to testing in the pub. You see, I'm almost prepared to miss my. No, I'm not. It's in an hour. So epiphany number 3.
Yeah. Okay, so I looked at how people were doing security. And of course, there's all the problems at the design level, and in the maintenance, and in the configuration level, and many things. But a lot of companies are simply relying on tools, and there are tools that penetration testers use that are interactive tools generally. So they guide the tool through the system, through multi-stage login processes, multi-stage payment processes, and they use their human intuition and intelligence to go and explore the whole site and then craft exploits to find out if there's a vulnerability. It is still negative testing because they're trying to make the system go wrong by proving that you can inject something malicious or something like that. But of course it would be in a harmless malicious way if the penetration tester was doing it. And they do it with the permission of the site owner or under the instruction of the site owner to conduct the test. You wouldn't just start penetration testing Tesco's website or something like that unless you wanted the police to knock on your door.
Yes, exactly. That would be a very stupid thing to do.
Yeah, but there are other. So apart from the interactive tools, like for example intercepting proxies, Burp Suite, Zap, Charles, and so on, and Metasploit, there are tools that are very popular among companies that are looking for a silver bullet solution. So they would go to one of the big companies like HP or IBM and so on, and then they would buy one of their, or rent, you can do it per seat or per scan and so on, different licensing payment systems. But they would then use a static analysis software tool that would look through the code at perhaps 10,000 lines per second, so they're fast, and look for signatures of vulnerable code. And they will find vulnerable code to some extent, but there will be lots of false positives, lots of false negatives, and a lot of vulnerabilities don't appear until the code is up and running. So there are dynamic analysis software tools, which are another family, but you can buy standalone dynamic tools as well from the same sort of suppliers that do the static analysis tools. And sort of one extreme, the security team might plug one into their system and push a button, and then a report comes out saying you've got these vulnerabilities, and they're nearly always the same ones of reflective cross-site scripting, command injection, SQL injection, path traversal, and a few other things to do with passwords. And I became very cynical about this the more I looked at it, that this is too good to be true. You know, if there really are tools that can do all the security testing for us, why can't they do all the testing for us? Because like security testing's got to be harder than anything else. So like, hey, we could just buy one of these tools and put our feet up and like just pass the report on to the developers, and like life would be sweet. But
That's like HP's dream, isn't it?
yeah, maybe it is. And there have been attempts to make this stuff work properly, but using artificial intelligence, but it generates massive amounts of false positive and false negative. So there's a lot of noise around these systems.
Yeah.
And I then eventually arrived at my third epiphany that this is not the way to be doing it. This is a very piecemeal approach. We're getting a lot of false positives, false negatives, We know we're not getting the right kind of coverage for security, and as we've moved from V model to iterative projects and then to agile projects and now DevOps, security has not kept up. Yeah, for sure, the people who first came out with agile or DevOps never stopped to say, let's check with the security guys what they think of this. They just charged ahead, and security has been trying to catch up unsuccessfully most of the time. And even the many theories there are on agile and DevOps and so on, for security, they're really still trying to spread a limited resource very thinly and trying to sample stuff, and I don't feel that's effective. The third epiphany for me was to totally change the way we do security.
Okay.
And it's more valid than ever in a DevOps environment. It's actually perfect for DevOps, but it also applies to anything else you're doing, whether it's waterfall, V-model, iterative, and so on. And that is to use sensors to monitor the code, all of it. So as the applications are built, work with the developers to add sensors that will report positively on the presence of good configuration for security and good coding for security. And I gave an example in my talk today of the HTTP headers having the right qualities to prevent clickjacking. And that's just one little example. That isn't the solution. We need hundreds of these things. So it would be a fairly substantial effort to build it in to an entire enterprise portfolio. But once it's in for good. And you only need to change it as a new vulnerability is discovered that requires an extra piece of coding or configuration to counter it. And the payoff in the long term would be fantastic. And it leapfrogs completely the problem of the skills gap between project teams not knowing what they're doing and security not having the resources to engage with them. So it would need a new kind of role to sit with the developers to create this stuff. And I think penetration testers could do it. I think I could do it. I think testers could skill themselves up to do it, to basically say, okay, let's consider the threat of cross-site request forgery. How do we block that? So are the things in place that will prevent an attacker establishing a path through our system? So it isn't necessarily one single vulnerability, it's the path through the system. And we could have a huge dashboard, like a data warehouse, reporting minute by minute on the status of our systems for security. And it won't all be green. There will be some reds and some ambers, and it'll all be bespoke to each individual enterprise. But this could work. The technology that we need exists already. Nobody's done it.
No.
And I'm sure it's going to happen. It solves so many problems. And it's just a question of applying the existing technology, sewing it together. So yeah, we might have penetration testers use ZAP to do a certain security test, and we automate it with Selenium, and then we connect it to Sonar that looks for components with known vulnerabilities, and we add that to like an Excel reporting spreadsheet or something like that, and then we build up a total view of the entire portfolio and how solid our security is and where we need to prioritize fixes.
And that's done much more earlier than in the software development lifecycle, I assume, than traditionally you would deploy security testing.
Yeah, well, this is the beauty. You could have the sensors, appropriate sensors, you may not have the same ones, in every environment. So from dev to test, performance, QA, security, production, any environments you've got, you could have the sensors in there. Because sometimes things are deployed to production and they end up in a different configuration, there's default functionality in the production environment that wasn't in the test or security environment that allows hackers to exploit the debug functionality or usernames and admins, admin username, admin password, stuff that's there when the box is delivered that somebody's forgotten to take away. So you could have a complete monitoring of every environment in real time for a comprehensive view of security by sensors monitoring. And for me, this is the third epiphany, that actually this is the most beautiful solution ever to the security problem, where testers are so far behind now where we need to be in security knowledge that it's hard to see how they can catch up. But this is a solution.
Yeah, it seems to make perfect sense. I mean, I think I've looked so much in the last couple of years about how we can take testing from what was traditionally in a waterfall environment the second to last thing you did, and make that and move that. I hesitate to use the word. I don't really like the phrase shift left. I think it's just buzzwordy and silly. But
shift
basically,
down. You can say shift down, then you don't have to say left.
Just do it. Just do it where it makes sense, and it normally makes sense to do those things much earlier.
Yes.
So it's all about doing that twofold, building that security in and doing that much earlier in the life cycle.
Absolutely.
And making the output of that much more visible, which is completely in line with where we're moving to anyway.
Yeah.
So where we have moved to, it's so much. It's analogous to monitoring in production, for example, and it's kind of to me it works very nicely with that. It works very nicely with that idea that you release, you monitor, you watch. Well, in this particular case, you do that security testing, you do that security monitoring at the earliest possible point, and then I guess you might still do some sort of pen test,
yes,
or
something
later, but again, they're not normally done in an iterative way. I would assume they're done, certainly the way that I've always experienced pen testing is, we need some pen testing, right, okay, let's get the pen testers in. Okay, 3 months later, we need some more pen testing, let's get the pen testers in again. It's not done regularly, whereas I get the impression that by building these sensors in from the start, that's just something that runs and just happens and just reports, and you almost don't pay attention to it until it goes red, and then you go, right, need to do something about it now before we release that. Mm-hmm. So therefore, before we essentially make that vulnerability exploitable.
Yeah, and you could make it that it's not possible to deploy something that is flashing too many red signals.
Exactly. Yeah.
But I totally agree. I mean, in theory, penetration testing should be part of the whole systems development life cycle. It should be happening right from the first units that are tested and anything that's being integrated. But there isn't usually the budget to do that.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
If there was, then you'd be sucking in all the penetration testers from around the world so that nobody else was getting them. And there just isn't enough resource to share around. So I think
exactly.
It's a good idea to have penetration testers, but we need a better solution than sort of pinpoint, piecemeal penetration testing when the budget and time is available. I feel like monitoring through sensors is like a comprehensively better solution. Mm-hmm. So you heard it here.
Yeah, no, exactly. It's a brand new idea, and you've heard it here. If you were at Softtest earlier, you've obviously seen it at Softtest. I would imagine your slides from Softtest are going to pop up online somewhere.
Yeah, I mean, I had this realization last week. So my presentation for Softtest had to be tweaked to change it from the straightforward $1 million bag of hammers where I was criticising the tools we were using and suggesting people make more use of interactive tools, to the realisation that actually sensors are the far better solution. So I want to work on this presentation again so that I really explain that, because I think it is difficult for people to understand. I mean, I've spoken to security people who straight away thought, sensors, that's like application sensors. The OWASP published a book on application sensors last year, but those are sensors to detect intrusions when you're under attack. And they're good things to have. So, by all means, have an application that can sense somebody's trying to log in multiple times and they've bypassed the client-side validation. That sort of stuff's great. But I'm not talking about sensing attacks. I'm talking about sensing positive build of good security coding and configuration is in place, and like flagging it up when it isn't.
Yeah. Very, very interesting stuff. Well, thank you very much, Declan.
Thank you, Stephen.
Thank you for coming along. Hope you enjoyed the Guinness.
Yeah,
We've got real Guinness.
Let's get them down.
Proof we got real Guinness. All right. Cheers. And we'll see you next time talk to you next time, indeed, on Testing in the Pub.
Absolutely.
Cheers.
Bye-bye.